Have you ever lost an argument to your teenager and then 10 minutes later you realized their point actually made no sense? It can make you feel a little bit crazy, but you're not. And today we're going to break down logical fallacies, the strategies people use to twist the truth and manipulate arguments without using actual facts. And it's no surprise this is happening and their teenagers are picking up on this because it's pervasive in society everywhere around. So let's get into what's actually happening. I want to help you prepare for the next time your teen asks for a later curfew or they nearly fall for the latest tricks that they're seeing on social media. I'm curious though, do most people generally know when they're being conned? I mean, I feel like I do, but do I actually? Do these lies and misconceptions tend to work on the general public? Recently in our tutoring group, logical fallacies were the topic of learning. And in my brain, I like to think that these words mean false logic. Like that's the actual, like literal translation. However, what we're seeing is intentional misleading and diverting and twisting of the truth. Even before I learned about logical fallacies, when others were using these strategies, I'd get that like big ick feeling, like, ooh, like something seems off. However, I wonder, like, was that actually true? Or is this just hindsight being 2020? Like, oh yeah, I knew, but I don't actually know if that's true or not. And I just am kind of like kidding myself after the fact. At any rate, I think I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. And today we're going to briefly chat about the history of logical fallacies, as well as some of the most common ones. As a parent, I feel like it's especially poignant as you guide your teen through a sea of unregulated information. It's more prevalent than ever for us to be aware of what's going on and what they're seeing and where is the credible information. How can we help our teens be aware of when people are trying to con us and not have accurate information that they're putting through there? Over my 20 plus years in education, I've seen exactly how crucial this skill is, helping a teen understand the logic behind a claim, whether it be in politics or on social media, or even their request for a later curfew has never been more relevant. Okay, so first off, let's just establish what a logical fallacy is and what it's not. So, a logical fallacy is a flaw in reasoning. It's an argument that uses poor logic. And so that logic, they're trying to make a claim and trying to convince us of something that can seem true and it can feel like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. But when we break it down, the logic is actually invalid. And it's important to note what a fallacy is not. It's not simply a factual error. It's not a mistake in somebody just like speaking and misrepresenting their words unintentionally that just comes out wrong and an error. Instead, it's a structural failure in how the argument is built. And people use them sometimes accidentally, but often purposefully in a way to manipulate an audience and win an argument without presenting actual evidence. A lot of times because their claims aren't based in reality, a lot of times because they don't actually have a leg to stand on, as they're grasping at straws. Okay. So here's a little background. And some of this is new information that was really fun for me to learn. As it turns out, there is not really a standard number of fallacies anymore. Scholars are continually identifying and classifying new ones. So as our culture changes and as there are new things brought in and learned and developed, we get new fallacies to learn about. And people who find them get to name them. So that's kind of fun that they change with our evolving culture. Um, I also learned that Aristotle originally, there was an original number. He originally identified 13 fallacies in his work, Sophistical Refutations. Sometimes adding to the complication when teaching teens is the information or the fact that most of these fallacies have both a Latin name and a modern name, so that can be a little overwhelming to teens. But as we give examples and real life definitions and then real life examples of how these play out and how they see them, we can break it down and make it real clear and even kind of fun, as teens can be like, oh, I saw somebody try that. And they have fun going and spotting them in the real world. Anyway, stay with me and I'll go ahead and break down some of the most common types in simple terms so you can navigate these with your teens and help them spot false logic in the wild. Now let's talk about some of the most common logical fallacies that you might encounter or that you might see your teen try to use or be influenced by, for that matter. Okay, so one of them is going to be the personal attack, traditionally called ad hominem. And this is where you'll see someone attacking a person's character instead of the actual argument. And I feel like this one's gained momentum lately. It's everywhere. And this is an example I used with my students in our lesson this week. And here's what it might sound like. We shouldn't listen to his ideas on the environment. Look how he dresses. What a complete goof. And a lot of times it's way more heinous than that, but I want to keep it somewhat respectable here. So we're attacking the person's character, what some people might believe about them, rather than their actual stance, rather than their actual credibility. Okay, nothing about the environment, just that person, just what we might be thought about them. Okay, the next one is called the bandwagon, or traditionally ad populum, claiming something isn't true or good simply because it is popular. And this reminds me of when I was a kid and my mom used to say, well, if everybody else was jumping off a bridge, would you? Well, let me know if you remember hearing that as a kid. And so here is what it might sound like. Everyone is using the new AI tool, so it must be the best way to learn. Not saying that these bandwagon approaches are not true. However, that's not based in credible logical facts. Okay, so we have to look at just because something's popular doesn't necessarily bring in factual evidence. The next one, we're just going to go with a popular name, which is slippery slope. And this would claim that one small step will inevitably lead to a chain of extreme disasters. It's kind of like you think of like a roof. As soon as you take one step off the roof, you're sliding right off, completely off the edge. Okay, so claiming that one small step will lead to extreme disaster. If we allow one late assignment, eventually no one will ever do work again. Like one step leads all the way to the end of the disaster, and that there are no steps in between. It's funny because when you hear a lot of these in the arguments or when people use them, like your brain just is like, follows along like they are truths. But then once we break them down and we hear them in this way, it's like, wait, we've skipped so much of the logic in there and they sound really ridiculous once we tease them and pull them up. Our next one is called straw man, or the straw man fallacy. And this is misrepresenting an argument to make it much easier to attack. When you hear it, the other person, the opponent, just twists it ever so slightly. And so once you break it down, the argument that they're combating is slightly different. And so you might not notice that they've changed the argument. So it sounds like you want to reduce homework. You must hate the idea of students learning. When the other person didn't say they hated students learning, they said they want to reduce homework. And so why did they want to reduce homework? Really, they might say they want to reduce homework and for the learning to happen in the classroom. They want to reduce homework so that students have more time to spend with families for important family issues, so that students can have more time for sports and engagement, so that they can have more energy to learn in school. However, the opponent would say, you must hate the idea of students learning. And then anybody who's listening was like, oh, what are these people thinking? They hate student learning. So we have to be really careful when we're listening to people. Are they actually addressing the claim and the argument in a factual way? Yeah, it's really tricky and fun. The next one's called the either or trap, false dilemma. And so this is presenting the idea that there are only two extreme choices when there actually are many other options. And here's one example. I'll give you two. You either support this new rule completely, or obviously you don't care about safety. Like, how could you not support this rule? What, you don't care about safety? That's crazy. Explaining it like there's only two options. You don't care about safety or you support the new rule. To break this down even farther for students, what I often say is, which type of roses do you like? Do you love white roses or do you love red roses? What? That doesn't make any sense. Clearly, somebody could love pink roses. They could love yellow roses. They could love manufactured roses with many colors. There are tons of colors of roses they could love, not just one or the other. And in most cases, there are lots of options to things, but if somebody doesn't really have a leg to stand on in their argument, they'll make it sound like there are two choices. Hardly ever is there a case, and that's a clue that somebody's using false logic when they're claiming that it's one or the other. Here's another one that's kind of similar to that. It's called begging the question, and the common term, or another term for it, is called circular logic, using the claim itself as the only evidence for the claim. And it sounds, if you're not paying attention, it sounds logical. Reading is important because it is an essential skill for everyone to have. But really, is there any evidence in that reasoning? Reading is important because it's an essential skill. Well, it's an essential skill, but isn't that saying the same thing? If we say it another way, reading is important because you must read. There's not really any reason behind that. So if somebody wants to support their claim, they actually have to give you a reason in it. So make sure when somebody's giving you their logic that there's actually something behind that logic, or else we're like, okay, tell me more. What is your reasoning? I want to believe you, but if I'm going to believe you, you're gonna have to give me some actual reasoning. All right. Next, we have over-generalization or hasty generalization, making a broad claim, a sweeping claim based on a very tiny sample size. And I'm going to give you two explanations for this one as well. A met one mean dog at the park. Therefore, all dogs are dangerous animals. Okay, well, I should hope not. I love dogs, I love cats. And hopefully just one rotten apple doesn't spoil the bunch. And here's another example. We used to hear this back, I'm going to date myself a little bit, but back in my day, way back when, we learned that smoking is bad. We should take take care of our health, and that there's lots of research that showed us that, if you smoke, it's linked to cancer. However, we used to hear people say, well, my grandma, she lived to be 100 years old and she smoked a lot all the time. Okay, I'm so glad that your grandma lived to be very old. However, that was one person, and that doesn't mean that you can generalize that, have a hasty generalization to apply to everybody, right? That's not backed research that can apply to everybody. We're not going to use that and be like, okay, it's safe. No, we're going to go for lots of data to make these health generalizations. And that takes us similar to another one called false authority, using a famous person as an expert on a topic they don't actually know about. So here's the example. This famous actor says, this energy drink is healthy, so it must be. Wait, they're a famous actor, though. Are they a doctor? No. Or even a doctor who makes a claim in a different area. So if this is a medical doctor, but they're giving mental health advice, are they a psychiatrist? No. Okay, so make sure the expert who's giving advice is actually giving advice in the area of which they're giving the advice in. All right, not just that they're famous. And so it's like, oh, we trust them because I recognize their face. All right, so thanks for joining me on this journey today. I want to give you 3 things to take away. 1, fallacies are formulas, not just mistakes. They're structural flaws used to twist the truth, not somebody just, oops, I slipped on my words. I didn't say what I meant to say, but that they don't have logic in their argument to show the evidence. Okay. And generally, they're trying to manipulate the audience because they don't actually have enough logic to back up what they're saying. Number two, recognize these traps because they're going to protect you and your team from being manipulated. There's just so much out there in the world and so much information that's not regulated that we really want to be aware of the information that's coming in and be like, hold up. No, I'm not falling for that. We want to be aware of that. And number three, tell me where you're seeing fallacies in the wild. So interested in your sphere. What do you see? All right. Thanks for joining me.